There are four types of sentence in English: simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. In this chapter, we will learn how to form each of them. First, however, we must look at clauses. There are essentially two kinds of clauses: independent and dependent. An independent clause must have three elements: a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. It is relatively easy to understand those first two, but how do you know whether or not a clause contains a complete thought? In fact, that is not so difficult. If it contains a complete thought, the sentence alone can be completely understood. In other words, no extra information is necessary. Let's look at some examples. Sally sings. She loves you. We are going to the mall this weekend. In the first example, there are only two words. This is a little unusual, but it goes to show that an independent clause can consist of nothing more than the subject and verb, and yet contain a complete thought. Nothing else is needed. If I told you Sally sings, you may have extra questions, but you get my meaning. On the other hand, dependent clauses do not contain a complete thought. This is because they almost always begin with a subordinator. A subordinator makes this clause less important to the meaning of the whole sentence, and therefore it must be attached to an independent clause to be fully understood. Subordinate means less important, and some people call these subordinate clauses for that reason. Take a look at this clause. Because he wanted to find out the answer. Here, because is a subordinator. Alone, this could not function as a sentence. It would be called a sentence fragment, meaning that it is only part of an idea. Instead, we need to add it to an independent clause, like this. Alan went to the teacher's office because he wanted to find out the answer. If I told you Alan went to the teacher's office, you would be able to understand me. It is a completely self-contained idea, and therefore it is able to function as a sentence. However, it is possible to add more information. In this case, we have added a dependent clause. The dependent clause could not function alone, because if I said to you, because he wanted to find out an answer, you simply could not understand my whole meaning. A simple sentence is just one independent clause by itself. It may have one subject and one verb, or several subjects and several verbs. A compound sentence is made up of two or more independent clauses. They may be joined by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Coordinating conjunctions are often known as fanboys. This is an acronym or mnemonic device to help you remember the coordinating conjunctions for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. In this example, we can see I like tea, but I prefer coffee. There are two independent clauses split by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. We could use a semicolon. I like tea, I prefer coffee. This is a little less common. You can only do this when the meaning is very close. Or we could split them with a semicolon and a conjunctive adverb. I like tea, however, I prefer coffee. Don't forget to put the comma after the conjunctive adverb. A complex sentence has one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. The two clauses will be joined by a subordinator, such as although, because, since, as, or a relative pronoun like who, which, or that. In this example, although it was raining, I walked to work, we can see the subordinator although. Although it was raining is thus a dependent clause. In a complex sentence, you can put the dependent clause first or second. It really doesn't matter. However, you should be careful with the punctuation. If the dependent clause goes first in a sentence, it should be followed by a comma. If the independent clause comes first, no comma is needed, as we can see in these two examples. The formula looks like this: independent clause plus dependent clause, or dependent clause plus comma plus independent clause. Either of these makes up a perfectly good complex sentence. Just remember, you can drop the dependent clause, but you cannot drop the independent one. I walked to work is a perfectly good sentence, but although it was raining is not. The first example is now a simple sentence, but the second one is a sentence fragment. Any single clause beginning with a subordinator is a fragment. This is a big mistake, and you should try to avoid it in your IELTS writing. Subordinate clause is just another way of saying dependent clause. Subordinate means that a clause is less important than the main clause. Look at these two simple sentences. I was tired. I went to the shop. Now look at this compound sentence. I was tired, but I went to the shop. In each case, the sentences have equal meaning. They are equally important. In a complex sentence, however, one clause is more important and one is less important. Although I was tired, I went to the shop. Now the reader knows which part of the sentence is the main idea. That's I went to the shop. As the name suggests, this type of sentence is a mix of compound and complex sentences. It must have at least two independent clauses and one dependent clause, meaning it has at least three clauses. We use the same conjunctions, subordinators or your fanboy coordinating conjunctions, to join the different parts. However, the clauses could go in any order. Here we can see two examples. The dog barked loudly and she ran all around the room as her owner tried to relax with his newspaper. We can see here an independent clause followed by one of our fanboys and another independent clause. Then there is a subordinator and a dependent clause. In the second example, the scouts did not think they'd make it to the destination because it was so far away and they were exhausted from the long journey. We can see we go independent, dependent, independent. Note the conjunctions above. They are the same as would be used in a complex or compound sentence. To review, there are 4 types of sentence in English. Simple, we play football. Compound, we play football and they play rugby. Complex, we play football when we're not busy at school. And compound complex, we play football if it's sunny and sometimes we play tennis.